Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for a webinar on the new Delegate Assembly and Political Agenda timeline and process. I'm Janice Palmer, and we have Mike Marcia here with us doing the technology and helping us out with questions. And what our plan is for this morning is to let you know that we want to answer any and all questions that you have. So please know that everyone that's on the webinar is in listen-only mode. So when you want to ask questions, there's an opportunity for you to type those in. You can type those in at any time, and we'll give you time frames too at the end. If you're still typing up questions or trying to get those last-minute items answered, we'll give some time and make sure that we allow for ample opportunity. The webinar also will be recorded and on our website, so that if there's something that didn't quite get, or there's persons that you know weren't able to make this time but want to take a look at it, that will be available, and we'll always be available to answer questions if you don't get them answered today. We are embarking on a new, we're really transforming our political agenda and delegate assembly, and we want to make sure that that it's transparent and that everyone has an opportunity to be full participants in that process. So to first start off, we'll talk about the new timeline. Proposed items are due on Friday, May 24th. You should have received the documentation both in hard copy as well as via email. If there's any questions on that after we go through what we're asking for in those proposals, let us know. The Legislative Committee will meet on Friday, June 7th, and once they take a look at all of the proposed items that you've sent in through district as well as any staff items, that they will create that draft agenda, and then that agenda will be sent out to all governing board members and superintendents, as well as our associate members the week of June 17th. And that's to give you ample opportunity to have that draft agenda put on your subsequent board meeting for, so that you can give your delegate direction of voting for it, amendments, anything that may or may not be missing. That allows that time. And then our delegate assembly will now be at the end of the law conference. So on Saturday, September 7th will be the delegate assembly. We hope that that provides better timing in the fact that the legislature will be finished, at least with most of their bill work. We'll probably still be working on budget items, but at least we can see what the legislature has done so that it will better inform what our political agenda will be for the subsequent year. And that meeting will be held at the Camelback Inn in Scottsdale again, Saturday, September 7th. And then we will unveil our advocacy efforts for the political agenda at our School Boards Association, School Business Officials and Superintendents Association Legislative Workshop. That will no longer be coupled with the annual conference. It will be a standalone on Friday, November 8th at the Buttes in Tempe on I-10 and 52nd Street. And that is going to be, again, an effort to better make the timing match our legislative efforts so that we can tell you about what our advocacy plans are and to help you start formulating those conversations with legislators early on so we're ready to go when session starts in January. So that is the timeline. So what are we looking for in our action agenda submission process? Talking about the old versus the new. If you remember, and I know we have some folks that have been with us for a number of years, we had our big book, a big book of 100+ items that were in one of 7 sections, everything from advocacy for children to funding to personnel. And those sections is where you would make your various proposals. That was in the past. There was also specific action items that you were looking to accomplish with no time frames. It was just, this is something that should be on your agenda, and either have that formulate what positions you're taking at the legislature for bills that are introduced by other legislators, or that should be on ASBA's agenda for proactive at some point in time. And then the Legislative Committee, as well as the entire Delegate Assembly, would look at each individual district proposal and say whether we were supporting those items or do not support each item. So that is the old process. What we are now doing with the new process is trying to make our agenda more relevant, more focused, and more accountable, frankly. And so the proposals that we're looking for are in 3 areas. Long-term issues. Long-term items are something that could be accomplished over 5 to 10 years. So examples of that, would be the school finance formula, redoing the school finance formula, tax policy, comprehensive tax reform so that we have a better tax system to support public education. And it could also be core items, something like upholding local control, ensuring that governing boards are the persons responsible for decisions. And I want to be very clear on this in that the proposals can look like anything, and they could be something as short as support local control. It could be something as long as, you know, revising the school finance formula so that equity is encouraged between property, wealth, high wealth and low wealth districts are taken care of. You know, if you want to have some commentary that goes along with that proposal, that is absolutely okay, and it will actually help the legislative committee to ensure that we get the intent of what your board is trying to convey for ASBA to support. So as short or as long as you want, just give as much information as you can so that the legislative committee knows what you're trying to accomplish. So the one area, long-term, 5 to 10 years. The second area is short-term. What can be accomplished in 3 to 5 years? An example of this would be maybe a phase-in of full-day kindergarten. If you all remember when we first had full-day kindergarten, we phased it in by the percentage of kids that were on free and reduced lunch, and that ended up phasing into full implementation. Of course, we've obviously lost that, but that I think is a good example of a short-term item that can be accomplished. And then the last category would be 2014 session-specific items. So what would you want to see in legislation this next year? Something like changing the word override to local support. And again, we're really trying to implement what you want to see us do, but also be held accountable for our success or lack thereof in there. So what this will be is, rather than a list of items that will be in a kind of a booklet, it will focus around strategic thinking and how we accomplish what our members want us to do. The other item that is going to be new is that all proposal submissions will be considered by the legislative committee. They will decide whether they're included in their draft agenda and where in the 3 categories they will be. However, we will not consider each individual item at that September 7th Delegate Assembly. And let me be clear on that. There will be communication back to the district about why the legislative committee included something or moved it to a different section or didn't include it. So the communication will absolutely be there, and communication is going to be key through this whole process about what has happened and why the legislative committee did the actions that they did. But it just will not take place in a formal process at the Delegate Assembly like it has in the past. The other item that I want to be sure to let you know about is that there is still the opportunity. So for instance, if the legislative committee chooses not to include a issue area that you think is still important, and there is still the ability at the actual Delegate Assembly to have 10 signatures to bring up a new item. Nothing has changed in that in our bylaws. So, but we really are trying to focus it more to the legislative committee to be ambassadors for the organization, create that draft agenda, and then really, if there's other items missing, that is not there's few of those brought up at the Delegate Assembly process. So how will the legislative committee develop the draft agenda? All the issues will be compiled in the relevant areas, and that will be sent to the legislative committee to take a look at beforehand, and then we will have the long conversation at the legislative committee. Just as a reminder, the legislative committee is appointed by the president. There's over 30 people that are on that committee, and they are very, very diverse from every single county in the state, from every single district, from the district type from the state, whether elementary, unified, union, JTED, and they're really the ambassadors to take a look at those issues and create that draft agenda. So they'll create the draft agenda in the 3 areas that will then be sent out to governing boards, superintendents, as well as associate members, and that is what will be voted on at the September 7th Delegate Assembly. So the Delegate Assembly, again, September 7th. One thing we want you to know that remains the same, voting remains exactly the same. You will still have to appoint a delegate for your school district who will have one vote at the Delegate Assembly, one vote per member district. And just to be clear, that's member districts. We do have some associate members that are able to comment, but they aren't able to vote. The draft agenda will be presented by the Legislative Committee through Chairwoman Ann Greenberg. She is leading up the Legislative Committee this year and is on the Paradise Valley Unified School District. And we'll do it by the 3 areas. Each individual item under the 3 areas will be considered, but they will be chunked out through the long-term, short-term, and 2014 specific. And then at the conclusion of the Delegate Assembly, that will be the 2014 political agenda. And as was said earlier, at our November meeting, we'll better articulate about how we plan to implement our political agenda on that, because as you well know, even though we call it the political agenda, they can help focus us in litigation, legislative, regulatory. There's different avenues of how we try to accomplish things. And that will be presented at the legislative workshop on November 8th. And so just to kind of a reminder, give full credit to Tracy on this. She found this perfect little picture in that just like the legislative process, we like to think that that is a straight line, but sometimes it takes a little bit more work, and sometimes, you know, not even sometimes, democracy can be very, very messy. And at the same time, by ensuring that we get everybody's input, that we really have a more substantive debate on the issues, that we will have better success in the long term for public education for what our members look like. And so, you know, we hope that this timeline really makes us more relevant, because the legislature, like I said, at least on the bill work, will be finished. We will get started earlier on our legislation in November so that we're prepared to go in January. We'll be more focused on those key items, and then you can hold us more accountable for what we've been able to accomplish and what we haven't, and we can better articulate what roadblocks we are running into and how we better, we're more successful into the future. And so with that, that's kind of the items that we wanted to go over. I'm sure that we have a few questions out there, and we'll give you about a minute of silence for folks to type in any of their questions, and then we will start going through any of those items. In the meantime, I want to let you know, please feel free to email either myself or Ann Greenberg, and we will send out those emails as part of the taped webinar if you have any subsequent questions, because I know it's a lot of information to take on, and like I said, the one thing that we don't want changed through any of this is the fact that your participation and your votes are key. This is definitely a membership document. We just want to make sure that we're focusing on the bigger issues and really putting a time frame of when we want to get those done. So I'll give you a little bit of time now. Let's give it a little minute. And Mike's going to lead us in some of the questions here.
Okay, hi everyone. Jill asks, what is the procedure for stopping a discussion and going to vote?
Great question, Jill. So that in our bylaws remains the same. So at the Delegate Assembly, let's say that we are debating one of the long-term issues and it's now gone on for 35 minutes. We feel like all of the issues have been put before us, you can still go ahead and call for the question, and that will need to be seconded, and there will need to be a supermajority vote in order to stop discussion and vote on that item. So that bylaw has not changed from previous.
All right, next question comes from Hilda. She wants to know if this PowerPoint will be available online.
Absolutely. Yes, it should be online by this afternoon.
And Mark asks, can you repeat this? Will it be available on the website? So he just wants to know when it'll be online this afternoon.
Yep, all of this will be online, both PowerPoint as well as audio. Like I said, if there's any questions or anything, it's really, really important to us that we get this right and that everyone feels and ensures that we have as much participation as possible. And hopefully, you can't see it, but we have our fingers crossed, hopefully this will make your board meetings and the preparation of proposals easier on you rather than having to kind of do more of our draconian process that we previously had.
All right, the next question comes from Melanie. It says, I'm sure you've given a lot of thought to how you would work within this framework. Can you tell us how you would approach long-term goals so that they do not remain permanently long-term?
Great question, Melanie. So long-term issues, you're absolutely right. They could easily become forever and forever. And I have to say the example used on school finance is probably the perfect item. And so that's where it's going to be important in November is that we are going to articulate how we do that. And so on a long-term school finance issue, it may be something a little bit different than what we've seen before. It may be working through the ABEC school finance work, but then showing that we will then work possibly with the Friends for ASBA in order to work with a stakeholder group to get an initiative on the ballot. That may be one item in that where we would show the number of years it would take and how we plan to get there. And so, you know, this is not just going to be a long-term, keep it in that category and just hope it takes effect. We will have an actual articulation of how, but that won't be until November, but of how staff plans to implement what membership have asked us to do. And that's part of why we want to put it into those three categories because, you know, we will still have this yearly process, but part of what the job of the legislative committee and ultimately membership is going to be, let's take a look at this plan. Was it successful? Was it not? Did we at least move the ball for the long-term items? And if we didn't, we need to recalibrate that next year of either the plan not being effective or that maybe we need to go a different direction for what our long-term goal is. But to get to the gist of your question, you membership will see how we look to accomplish each and then hold us accountable for what that plan is.
Cynthia asks if she can see a list of the legislative committee.
Absolutely. We will send out a list of the legislative committee members. And I should tell you this too. Yesterday we talked with our legislative committee members and specifically asked them to reach out to districts to really get a pulse. You know, we asked them really to be sure that they have their ear to the ground about what's important to the districts in their area, as well as you know, feel free of asking your business managers, asking your superintendents, especially as it relates to 2014 session-specific items. Sometimes those folks are in a better position to articulate the specific items that need to take place. So that, you know, what we want for the legislative committee is to have as much information as many items as possible, and then for them to synthesize it down to an agenda that is not only reflective of what membership wants, but has a reasonable chance of being effectively implemented.
All right. The next question comes from Barb. She thanks us for streaming this. She says, it's gotten quite cumbersome to choose a top 10 for each board, and often important issues were omitted. This is a much better way to operate. I am concerned, though, that some good proposals will never be included due to strong influence of individual districts.
And thank you, Barb, for that. Thank you for capturing, because that's what we're hopefully doing, that we're really trying to make the process less cumbersome of having to go through a delegate assembly and then subsequently doing a top 10. This should help articulate what the priorities are through the various items. You know, I'm hopeful, you know, you can never guarantee everything, but I'm very hopeful that this would not dilute any individual school district through this process, because what this will do is really have the most important issues that affect a large number of districts rise to the top. And the only area that I can see of having some struggle is if there's a specific issue for one specific district. And frankly, when in the past, when that has been the issue, that hasn't been supported necessarily from the legislative committee. I mean, if it's one specific item, that's something that as your association we will help support you in, but might not really be appropriate for an entire association document, because it's not, it doesn't affect the majority of districts. So that's a long way of saying if there is a specific item that affects one specific district, we would do that right now regardless. We would help you find the avenue best to get that accomplished, but it may not be for an entire association document. We really want the association document to be the majority of what districts need, regardless of whether it's all-day kindergarten, regardless if that's a certain administrative burdens being reduced.
We have another question from Jill. She says, please confirm that we will get a copy of the proposal so we can discuss as a board and be prepared at the assembly.
Yes. So Jill, at the week of June 17th, the draft agenda will be sent out to every governing board member and superintendent. And we'll probably do, we will do it the same way we did this time, hard copy as well as email. So we make sure that everyone does in fact receive that. And that draft agenda will then be discussed by your entire board to give direction to the delegate, which I'm going to assume you're the delegate. What will be different is the individual proposals that the school districts have submitted will not be sent to every single governing board member and superintendent. There'll be a one-on-one communication with the district that submitted the proposals and a rundown of what the legislature did or did not and why. But the only thing that all of membership will consider is the draft agenda from the legislative committee. From that point, the options as a district are, if there's amendments that want to take place, maybe you want to further define one of the long-term items, you can go ahead and have that amendment ready for the Delegate Assembly on September 7th, and all you need is that delegate signature. It's just like the process we had. You know, any individual delegate can amend the agenda. If after as a board you think something is missing, then what would need to take place is at the Delegate Assembly, there would have to be the proposal written out and 10 delegates signed on in order to bring that up. But that is only for an issue that has no relevancy or has not included anywhere in the agenda.
All right, we have another question from Melanie, and she asks, will federal issues be a part of the process, or will that be handled in FRN and by NSBA?
Oh, great question, Melanie. Federal issues will follow the National School Board's agenda unless something else is brought up through the process. What our federal issues have pretty much been for the past few years is just a mirror of what the National School Boards Association agenda is. However, I can definitely see, you know, I know some of this probably sounds vague, but I don't want to assume what the legislative committee is going to do, because it's really, this is really organic and we want it to come up however it looks like. But for this year, you know, federal issues I think have taken on a heightened importance with sequestration, impact aid, some Title I changes. And if this is something very significant that districts see, it could definitely be a short-term or a session-specific issue that you want us to bring up at NSBA or in our federal lobbying. So if no federal issues are included in there, it doesn't change the fact that we will follow NSBA's. But if there are federal issues that rise to the top, there's no reason that they shouldn't be included within our document.
And Mark follows up. He wants to know if we're going to provide email and phone numbers with the legislative committee members.
Mark, no, we will not have email or phone numbers with the legislative committee members. That can obviously reach them with our through our directory. But again, please, even though the legislative committee is of heightened importance, please know that we'd ask you to respect the process. I mean, obviously you can talk to any legislative committee you want, but it still is important that you submit your proposals by that May 24th deadline, because those will be the actual proposals discussed at the legislative committee. If you want to further articulate what those items are, it's absolutely appropriate. But I don't want to leave the impression that just talking to the legislative committee, a legislative committee member, would guarantee that that proposal comes forward, because it's going to be left to that individual to bring it up. But if you have it in documentation and you put it in the proposal, it's guaranteed to come up for the whole group, because that's going to be included in their packet.
And Karen asks, does this mean that there will no longer be the need for governing boards to pick their top 10?
Absolutely. There will no longer be a top 10 priority issue. So we've cut out that one portion of the process. And again, really, the November legislative workshop will show what we are planning to do to implement those items. And that's why it's going to, frankly, the legislative committee has a very, very difficult task in front of them, in that they are going to have to create an agenda that is a draft agenda that is inclusive of what membership wants, but also reasonable in the fact that we may be not able to do 40 different pieces of legislation this year. We'll need to really focus on the steps necessary to get these items done.
Karen says yay. Kathy has a follow-up question. On that note, it might be useful to keep track of the items that did not make the top 10. Can there be a parking lot that is retrievable?
Absolutely, absolutely. That staff will keep track of those items, and what we hope to do is kind of keep a historical view too of what what items are included and what items are not, and why they're happening, because that's going to need to be, the legislative committee, like I said, has a lot on their shoulders, and they're going to need to be responsive for whatever decisions are made. The other thing that we will keep track of, again, I'm probably assuming a little bit here, but when they use the example of 40 pieces of legislation next year, I have a feeling that depending upon how the discussion goes, there's going to be items that people would like to see next session that maybe just are too much, that may be moved. A district might want that as a 2014 session item, but may have to be more of a short-term issue because of the prioritization that's taking place there. And keep in mind, when you're at the Delegate Assembly, these are going to be recommendations that come from the Legislative Committee, and there may be certain short-term items that the membership thinks are just way, way too important to wait 3 to 5 years, and in fact, that should be moved to a session specific. That's absolutely going to be possible, and again, really try to focus staff on what needs to be accomplished, what is the most pressing priorities, and then what do we have some time to address.
And that's it for questions, if you want to.
Perfect. Well, that is the end of any questions that we have. But please, again, my email, jpalmer, JPALMER, @ASBA.org, and then we'll also include Ann's in the webinar and audio that will be posted to our website. But please, if you have any questions that arise, as you're getting your agendas together to start talking about, if something doesn't make sense, please, please, please feel free to give us a call. Like I said, we want to make sure that this process really is more effective, and the only way it's more effective is that if everyone participates in it. So we thank you very much and hope you have a wonderful Friday and weekend.